Hello and welcome back to Offsides, BUTV10's only professional sports talk show. I'm Monet Oda.
And I'm Smarn Ramadi. Today we'll celebrate 75 years of the NBA as our analysts Alex Cohen and Jay Housman highlight the history of the league.
And Jared Kaplan will be joined by analyst John Singer and Maiclaire Sabin to go over the first college football playoff ranking of the season.
Then MLB experts Daniel Multz and Seth Helman will recap the World Series and give a preview of the offseason.
And lastly, Tyler Carroll will break down the Chicago Blackhawks sexual assault scandal.
All this and more, Offside starts right now.
"25 years after compiling the NBA's top 50 list, NBA legends, coaches, media members, and executives have reconvened to put together a list of the best 75 players ever in honor of the NBA's 75th anniversary. Amazingly, all 50 from the first team made the next installment, along with 26 new additions, one due to a tiebreaker. Jay and I will be taking you on a journey through all eras of the NBA as we highlight the greatest players from each. To start off, let's look at the NBA's earliest 25 years. A star of the time was Jorge Miken, who dominated the league's early years so overwhelmingly that despite winning 5 championships, his greatest legacy is necessitating the NBA to install a shot clock just to slow him down. Many of the other NBA greats from the league's first years made the list, including Dolph Schayes, Paul Arizin, and Bob Cousy, all who played on the first All-Star team all the way back in 1951. It was Cousy who would start off the Celtics' incredible dynasty of 12 championships in just under 2 decades. Along with John Havlicek, Dave Cowens, Sam Jones, Bill Sharman, and of course, Bill Russell. And you cannot discuss Bill Russell or the history of the NBA at all without Russell's rival, Wilt Chamberlain, who scored the NBA's lone triple-digit 100-point scoring game and has filled up countless records as he made a legend for himself. Along with Arizin, Wilt had legendary other teammates near the end of his career that were also on this list. Elgin Baylor, and of course, the logo himself, Jerry West.
After the Celtics dynasty ended, Bill Russell retired as a player, and many big things happened in the NBA in the 1970s. For instance, players that were big in college became big names in the NBA too. Oscar Robertson of Cincinnati, who led the Milwaukee Bucks along with Lou Alcindor, aka Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, went to cap up their first NBA title in 1971. It took them 50 years for them to break the curse in 2021. To win back in the 1980s, the Celtics were back in as a powerhouse that had a heated rivalry with the Los Angeles Lakers. Both teams with their star players, led by Magic Johnson from Michigan State, who played for LA, and Larry Bird from Indiana State, who played for Boston. Johnson was a dynamic force in the 80s as he led his team from one win to the next. His name and base and symbol of the Lakers. However, in 1991, when he announced that he was diagnosed with HIV, he was forced to retire early. Also in the 80s, the Chicago Bulls drafted Michael Jordan from North Carolina, and we all know what happened after that, folks. His fierce competition and amazing dunks and winning shots and his leadership on and off the court brought the team to the victory game after game. During the mid-90s, when Jordan took an early retirement, the Houston Rockets, led by Keanu Olajuwon, became the new golden team. They went to win titles in 94-95. The Houston Rockets started out as an underdog, but in 1995, they won their second NBA championship as a 6th seed. This is the only low seed in the NBA playoffs. Their memory is forever known by many Suns fans by Mario Elie score of the three-pointer shot to heavily favored Suns, which became known as the kiss of death and probably the most memorable single shots ever taken in NBA history.
After some glimpses of his greatness at the tail end of Jordan's career, it became Shaquille O'Neal's league, as he dominated with his unstoppable postgame of the low block. He was aided by the one and only late Kobe Bryant, who would go on to electrify the league with his dazzling moves that could only remind everyone of Michael Jordan. He did this all the way through the 2000s, where he would face off with other top 75 players in Boston's Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Ray Allen in throwbacks to the Celtics-Lakers rivalries of the past. Bryant would pass down the best player in the league torch to LeBron James, who would make the case to be the greatest player of all time. He did this with fellow top 75 member Dwayne Wade on the Miami Heat. They would dominate the league, though they would prove infallible at times, falling short to others in the top 75 list in Dirk Nowitzki and Jason Kidd's Mavericks, along with Kawhi Leonard and Tim Duncan's Spurs. Despite the crowd of superstars in recent decades, LeBron has continued to dominate the league in thrilling battles against the next dynasty in the Golden State Warriors with two of the greatest scorers of all time in Seth and Curry, who created a three-point boom with his circus high-volume shots from deep, and Kevin Durant, who showed us that big men can play like guards. Despite this duel of the super teams, two others in Chris Paul and Giannis Antetokounmpo showed last season that you don't always need top 75 players around you to compete for or win a ring. When you only have 5 players on the court at the time, it's no surprise that the 75-year history of the league can be told entirely through its players. Happy 75th, NBA!
The college football season is in full swing, and things are heating up with the release of the first college football playoff ranking. My name is Jared Kaplan. I'm joined today by Maye-Claire Sabin and John Singer to discuss the playoffs and what teams could break the mold and make their first appearance. CFB rankings determine who will play in the annual college football playoffs in January, and only 4 teams can make the cut. The committee has been under scrutiny for big program bias in the past, such as when last year Notre Dame made it over Texas A&M. In the 7 years the playoff existed, only 12 programs made the playoffs, and only 6 programs have ever won the game. Fans worry that the playoffs ruined other bowl games, and with top players opting out of their bowl games to prepare the NFL draft, it's a real mess. So overall, there's been a lot of scrutiny, and it might be time for a makeover to the still young playoff format. My first question is about the undefeated Cincinnati Bearcats. The AP poll puts them at number 2, and the first CFP poll has them debuting at number 6. Maye-Claire, which poll is more accurate?
In general, I take the college football ranking over the AP poll because of their college football acumen. The committee's rankings are the ones that will ultimately reflect the 4 teams going to the college football playoff. Cincinnati had an insane win against Notre Dame, but Cincy was also the Fighting Irish's only loss all season. I don't think an undefeated season with wins against teams like Indiana and Temple justifies the Associated Press putting them in second place. And for the record, these were close wins. They weren't blowouts. The Bearcats have had a great run, but not nearly great enough for such an insanely strong ranking.
I've got to agree with Maye-Claire here and say that the College Football Playoff Committee having Cincy at number 6 is much more accurate. While the Bearcats certainly have one of the season's best wins from when they went on the road to South Bend and took out the Irish, they have been far from perfect since then. A 2-6 Navy squad and a 1-7 Tulane squad led by their third-string quarterback gave them fits at times. They'll need some major style points down the road, it would appear.
While I think Cincy has a very good shot at the playoffs, I have to agree. They've had some questionable performances against weaker opponents. Speaking of questionable, there's always teams that are ranked high this time of the season that get exposed by December. John, what team do you believe will fall down the rankings by the time of the final playoff poll?
Jared, I don't want to sound biased here, as I am a big Michigan fan, but I believe it has to be Michigan State. Yes, Kenneth Walker III is a strong Heisman candidate, and their win against Michigan is probably the second biggest of the entire season, but I don't believe Sparty will be able to get past Ohio State and continue their run towards the playoff. I think the playoff representative from the Big Ten is inevitably going to come from the game up in Ann Arbor.
I want to start by saying I've got to agree with John about Michigan State. Their Michigan upset was some of the greatest football they've ever produced. But for me, I'm going to go with Wake Forest. And I hate to do this because they've gone undefeated and my sister Emma goes there. Emma, if you watch this, I apologize now. Wake just does not have the resume as a lot of other highly ranked teams. With close wins against Syracuse and Louisville, I wouldn't be surprised to see them slip up over the following few weeks. Without wins or matchups against high-ranking teams, Wake just doesn't have the chance to prove themselves before the playoffs. The Deacons' last 4 games are against fairly low-ranking teams. If Wake loses to just one of them, they're automatically going to drop out of the top 10, and it's game over.
I personally had a problem with Oregon at 4, who lost to a 3-5 Stanford team, but MSU and Wake are definitely 2 teams that will have to keep proving the skeptics wrong. The team that has a big narrative to overcome are the #1 ranked Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia this year is a machine with a historically good defense, only allowing 5 touchdowns in 8 games and less than 7 points a game. The only thing that matters to them now, though, is winning a championship. Maye-Claire, are they going to win it all, or will fans of Georgia football suffer yet another heartbreak?
Oh, I certainly hope so. I've loved Georgia my whole life. Heartbreaking is definitely the word I use to describe their always near perfect playoff runs. They're ranked first in the CFP poll and just could not be closer to taking it all. This season, offensive coordinators for South Carolina and Arkansas both entered the locker room absolutely rattled by the Bulldogs' defense, according to ESPN. Kirby Smart's defense is just a relentless onslaught that chews the offense up and spits them right back out. They're about to enter these next 4 games against unranked teams with a ton of momentum.
I too think this could be the year for Georgia sports fans. The championship monkey per se is already off their backs due to the Braves, and while it is incredibly tough to take a team not named Alabama against the field, I believe Georgia has a great shot to win it all this year. They should make the playoff even if they lose a close one to Alabama in the SEC championship game, but I believe they will definitely need their starting quarterback JT Daniels back and playing at a high level down the stretch.
I agree with both of you. Georgia has the type of roster that even if they don't play perfectly, it'll be hard for any team to gain enough momentum to beat them. Their defense is historically good, and it'll take a special offense to make a game competitive against them. Outside the last week's 10-3 win against Clemson, the closest team has gotten is Kentucky, who still beat them 30-13. So even when the offense falters, that defense is just a black hole. That being said, there could be some other teams who could claw their way back into the playoffs, and all it would take is 2 games to be crowned national champions. John, who would you consider your sleeper team this year?
My sleeper team has to be my Michigan Wolverines. Despite another heart-wrenching loss at the hands of Michigan State last weekend, I still believe this season is different. If they can shake off the disappointment from last week and find their rhythm again versus Indiana, I definitely believe they can run the tables and beat Ohio State. They boast one of the nation's best running attacks with their two-headed monster of Blake Corum and Hassan Haskins, and it looks like quarterback Cade McNamara is finally coming into his own as he had some great plays last week against Sparty.
You're really hitting them hard with those Michigan teams, John. But I'm going to take us out to the Midwest. My sleeper team is the Oklahoma Sooners. Oklahoma is ranked 4th by the AP poll and 8th by the CFP. They have 2 upcoming games against 14th-ranked Baylor, Iowa State, and 11th-ranked Oklahoma State. Quarterback Caleb Williams is top 10 in the Heisman rankings. Williams is quick on his feet and absolutely capitalizes when he sees a weak defense. The rivalry between Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, historically known as the Bedlam Series, has seen the Sooners win 90 games to Oklahoma State's 18. Ironically, Baylor's only loss was to Oklahoma State, so there's absolutely nowhere for the Sooners to go but up as they close out what's going to be an undefeated season.
Oklahoma looked like they were belonging to the pretender category when Spencer Rattler was the starting quarterback, but with Williams at the helm, they could prove to be legit in the next 2 weeks. I'd never count a Lincoln Riley team out. I'd also keep an eye out for Wake Forest. I know that May Claire had criticism of the past, but their offense has been red hot, and if teams above them lose and they keep winning, who knows how far the Demon Deacons can go. There's plenty of teams that can make a run given this chance. So my final question is, should the playoffs extend? With only 4 teams able to compete, many have clamored for an 8, 12, or even 16-team playoff to rival college basketball's March Madness tournament. May Claire, should the committee consider expansion?
Oh, absolutely. I think football fans see a 12-team playoff is absolutely just inevitable, and I would agree. But the college playoffs would test the waters with an 8-team playoff first. A 12-team expansion would cause college teams to play a season equal to that of the NFL, and that's just a lot of stress on young talent. However, down the road, a 12-team format would push the college playoffs past the NCAA Men's Division I basketball tournament as the largest financial force in college sports. Executives estimate that an expanded format would pull in an extra $2 billion a year. The 4-team system is broken. College teams who make the playoffs end up recruiting better players and inevitably return to the playoffs that next year. The commission's got to give other teams a chance, and an expanded format is absolutely the way to make that a reality.
I think it should. However, I don't think the proposed 12-team expansion will be good for the sport. One of the greatest things college football has going for it is how important each and every week is, and if you expand the playoff to 12 teams, I believe some of these matchups will lose their flair. Plus, we are debating whether or not Ohio State and Cincinnati need to be included in the top 4. Do we really need to be doing the same thing with Auburn, Texas A&M, or Ole Miss? We've seen plenty of times already how that story plays out when they stare down Georgia and Alabama on the gridiron. A 6 or 8 team playoff should do just the trick.
I think it's an obvious answer. There's simply more than 4 teams competitive enough to be the best in college football every season. I think the committee should expand the playoffs to 8 teams as soon as possible, and from there entertain the idea of a 12 or 16 team playoff. I don't trust them to do so until there's a team that's clearly left out that deserves to be in the playoff, but it will happen. That's all for our coverage of the upcoming college football playoff. Now we'll send it over to Daniel and Seth to talk some MLB. Take it away, guys.
Thanks, Jared. The MLB season has recently concluded with the Atlanta Braves being crowned champion. I'm Seth Helman, and I'm joined today by Daniel Multz to discuss that World Series and the upcoming offseason. Daniel, let's discuss the World Series first. Tell me, do you think that Jorge Solaire deserved to be named World Series MVP?
Absolutely. On top of hitting 2 home runs, one of which was a 3-run moonshot in Game 6 that literally left Minute Maid Park, it sent the Astros' chances of winning a title with it. I think between his ability to pick up at the leadoff spot and just overall, in the World Series, if it goes to a hitter, the guy who hits the biggest home run or gets the most clutch hits tends to win the award, and it absolutely has to be him.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in the sense that Solaire did have the most clutch hits of anybody in the series, but if you ask me, it should have been Freddie Freeman. Nobody was as good consistently for the Braves as he was throughout the entire playoffs. He was top 3 in average in every single series. I don't think that anybody deserved it more than he did, and the only difference between him and Solaire in the World Series was 1 home run and 1 RBI. Next, let's discuss the offseason. Who do you have as your biggest non-shortstop free agent?
It's no contest. It's Kris Bryant. Traded from the Cubs to the Giants midway through the season. Not only did he demonstrate his versatility playing at 6 different positions throughout the year, but he hit .265 with an OPS in the mid-800s. He's demonstrated that he still has all the talent in the world, and at just 29 going on 30, you can get him for a long-term deal and still get a lot of productive years out of him.
See, I'm going to go with a pitcher here. We're not going to talk a lot about pitchers today, so I think one deserves to get some love, and that's Max Scherzer. Scherzer absolutely dominated this year, posting a career-low ERA, a career-low WHIP that led the league, and he went 7-0 after the deadline once he got traded to the Dodgers. He might be on the older end and at the back end of his career, but he's going to dominate and he's going to be an ace in somebody's staff when the free agency is over.
I'm just not sure you can give that nod to a 37 going on 38-year-old pitcher. I hear you, Scherzer's as good as they come, but if I had to pick between someone like Scherzer at the end of his career and Bryant still in his prime, I mean, not really a contest there, but I hear you.
I mean, hey, there's going to be a contender out there that's looking to give somebody who's a veteran, who they know is going to pitch well for them, a short-term contract. Let's move on to the shortstops here, and the class is absolutely loaded. You got Correa, you got Semien, you got Baez, you got Story, you got Seager, and even other names like Andrelton Simmons, who we're not going to discuss today, but certainly is a great shortstop. Let's start off by discussing who you think the best option is at shortstop this free agency.
For me, it's Marcus Semien. Guy hit 45 home runs last year for the Toronto Blue Jays, the best offense in the league without question. He wants to move back to shortstop, and that's why I think he's going to leave Toronto. At his age of 31, he's slightly older, but I actually think that's to his advantage. He'll get a shorter term, more budget-friendly deal, and with the way the shortstop market and the prices for them have exploded, Semien will benefit by getting more teams to call his name because of that shorter term that he's going to get.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, but I think that Carlos Correa is by far the best shortstop in this class. Nobody's going to touch him offensively, especially from an average standpoint. Nobody's going to touch him fielding-wise. Nobody has the range he has, the arm he has, the consistency that he has. And trash can or no trash can, he's the best offensive player on this list by far. There's no question. Let's move on to our next topic. Who do you think is going to be the cheapest guy on the list?
I think the cheapest option is going to be Trevor Story, formerly of the Colorado Rockies. He had the most down year out of any of these guys, and when your OPS barely cracks 800, playing half your games at Coors Field, especially when the whole league knows how good of a player Story was in past seasons, look, there's no question that he's an unbelievable fielder, base runner, and power hitter, but where he struggles is in a lot of strikeouts and especially in the consistency, and I just think with the year he had and the vibe he had on a bad end with his time with the Colorado Rockies, things are just not going to bode as well for him as the other guys.
See, my thing with Story is, yes, his power numbers have gone up and down, but his highs are so high that I think that somebody's going to give him a lot of money. And like you mentioned before with Semien, who's my pick to be the cheapest option in this shortstop class, because he's older and because he's going to have that shorter contract, I don't think he's going to have as much leverage as some of these other guys are going to have. Yes, he is by far the best power hitter out of all of these guys, but the average slumps a little bit, and from a defensive standpoint, I think he's a much better second baseman than he is a shortstop. So if that's really what he wants to do, he'll be able to do it just fine, but I don't think that he's going to do it well enough to garner as much money as the rest of the guys. Next, let's move on to a specific name on this list. Javier Baez got traded from the Cubs to the Mets at the trade deadline. Some would say that he doesn't even deserve to be in the same conversation as Correa and Seager and Story. What do you say about that?
I think whoever says that is absolutely right. I think if this was 2018 when Baez finished top 3 in NL MVP voting, yeah, then you could make that case. But since then, it's become a tale of two different players. You look at Cubs Baez from the first half of 2021, where he was barely batting his weight, and the highlight was just a trick play running back towards home plate before running to first base and taking second against the Pirates. And then he hit almost 300 as a Met. And sure, he's got all the swagger in the world, and he's such a fun player to watch, but at the end of the day, you just don't know which Baez you're going to get. He's the least consistent, and I don't think you can put him up there in a class of shortstops where the other four are almost exclusively known for their consistency.
See, I think that Baez does deserve to be in this conversation. The only guy on the list who's better from a fielding standpoint is Correa, and then from a power standpoint, the only guy that's better than him is Semien. So yeah, he's not the best, but he's certainly not the worst on the list. And like you mentioned, he had a quiet .299 with the Mets after the trade deadline and hit well over .300 in his last 26 games. So I think he absolutely deserves to be in this conversation. Now, final topic, out of all of the guys in the shortstop class, if you were a general manager right now entering free agency, who are you going to give a contract?
It's easy. It's got to be Carlos Correa. Listen, Seager, Story, Semien, and Baez all have their pros and cons, but Correa is almost exclusively pros. He's arguably the best hitter, arguably the best power hitter, and I think that he's the best fielder, and his durability has become much less of a question as his career has gone on. Not to mention, he'll also only be 27 years old by the time next season rolls around. He'll be young, he'll be talented as hell, and listen, it's going to be a pretty high price tag to get talent like that, but you know what you're going to get for as many as 6 or 7 years of that contract. It'll be worth it. I'd give whatever he wants, however many Brinks trucks it takes to bring him the contract value he wants, send it his way.
Look, I think you have a really good point with Correa there. He is by far the best guy in this class, like I said before, but I personally am going to sign Javier Baez. You did mention how inconsistent he can be, but to me, that's exactly what makes him the most consistent guy of this class. You know he's going to strike out a lot, but you also know he's going to hit bombs. He's going to make flashy plays in the field. He's got a stellar arm. And, best part, he never cheated. So, he's got that undeniable swag. You look good, you feel good, you play good. That affects the entire locker room. And I just think there's no better option there to take.
He may not have the same peaks or valleys, but he's essentially the Joey Gallo of shortstops in this class. When he's flying high, he's unstoppable, but there's other times where he's going to look like he shouldn't even be up there at the plate. I don't know why you'd want to pay him, but hey, listen, that's why we both get to make our own calls, right?
Right. I mean, exactly. We're going to pretend like we didn't see him swing 3 feet over a slider just once or twice, you know? But that's all we have for today's discussion of the World Series and the offseason in the MLB. Ty, over to you.
Thanks, guys. The off-ice controversies for the Chicago Blackhawks continue to fester this week, with more and more support being expressed for Kyle Beach and other survivors of sexual assault. Here's a little bit of background. During their trip to San Jose for the 2010 Western Conference Finals, Chicago Blackhawks video coach Brad Aldrich sexually assaulted a player on the team. Aldrich was fired a few months after the incident for allegedly sexually assaulting another intern for the Blackhawks. After leaving Chicago, he sexually abused 3 more college and high school hockey players before getting arrested in 2014. In June of this year, the Blackhawks player that Aldrich assaulted filed a lawsuit under the name John Doe against the Blackhawks for their handling of the situation. A few weeks after the assault, there was a private team meeting between coaches and presidents of the organization who decided that instead of going public, they'd keep the incident private, worried that the scandal would distract the team that was so close to the Stanley Cup at the time. Of the few members of that cast that are still working in the NHL, Stan Bowman stepped down as Chicago's president, and Joel Quenneville recently resigned his role as head coach of the Panthers, who were undefeated at the time. It is unclear whether more resignations will take place as a result of the ongoing investigations. Notably, Winnipeg Jets general manager Kevin Cheveldayoff, who was the assistant GM in Chicago at the time, met with Bettman, and it was decided that he could continue working in the league despite being involved in the closed-door meeting. Many in the hockey community have been expressing their support for Beach despite the notable silence culture in the NHL, a culture that many deem responsible for the lengthy process that it's taken for Beach to get justice. I don't believe that the players are scot-free here either. They could have been around the whole situation and not known what was going on, but I think it's a lot more likely that they knew exactly what was happening and didn't say anything. Beach was drafted 11th overall in 2008 and was playing at the top level hockey against the best teams. Even if those players didn't know, I was extremely disappointed in Blackhawks captain Jonathan Toews' response to the situation, expressing sympathy for Stan Bowman and other Blackhawks officials instead of coming to Beach's aid. In his first public statement on the matter, Toews said, "To me, Stan and Al, make any argument you want, they're not directly complicit in the activities that happened. I just know them as people and I've had a relationship and friendship with them for a long time," end quote. At the end of the day, this is surely not the first incident of its kind in the NHL and hockey as a whole, but hopefully with widespread awareness and systemic change from league officials and players, the league can learn and improve from this going forward. The future of the NHL needs to be one that includes everyone and doesn't take these situations lightly. There needs to be zero tolerance for abusers taking advantage of their positions and full immunity and safety for those that come forward. I asked Jonathan Toews this: how does that ring feel? They gave Brad Aldrich a ring when they fired him. As a result of this scandal, the NHL also had to cover Brad Aldrich's name on the Stanley Cup. And while that certainly is a step in the right direction, the fact remains his name should never have been on there. Smarin and Monet, back to you.
Thanks, Tyler. That's all we have for this week's episode of Offsides. If you're interested in joining our team, please email us at offsides@butv10.com.
Also, be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Offsides10.
On behalf of our entire cast and crew, thanks for watching and have a great night.